But now they've certainly made it more palatable.
Sure.
They've given them a location.
Sure.
They've given them phone, computers, and things to work with. But still, they may not have that same type of rapport that they would like to have. They're not always included on campus events. They're not always able to attend all of the meetings because of other commitments. And so with a full-time tenured professor, they are totally, I like to think, committed, sold out, extra hours above and beyond, whereas an adjunct cannot always do that.
Did you want to add something to that?
Well, sure, and their pay is not great. I mean, that, you know, I mean,
Bottom line.
I was adjunct as well. I worked with the adjunct union when I was an adjunct. I'm adjunct at Chicago State as well, and although I'm full-time here, but the reality is for most adjuncts, they don't make that much money. And so, and the flip side, and this is the danger in this, is the academic freedom issue. Because if you are an employee that is sort of at will, you know, if we like you one semester, we keep you. If you don't like you, then how in the world can you teach, say, a class like mine, like what Linda teaches, on democracy and politics, and explore controversial and unpopular issues in the class and give them full time? Because the reality is, as we know, everyone that we're dealing with, whether they be administrators, et cetera, people have positions on political issues.
Sure.
So without the freedom of tenure, it makes it difficult to explore these things that I think must be explored if you're going to really contribute to the democratic process.
The freedom point is a good one, but when we talk about bad teachers, right, or I'm talking about the abject failures as teachers, those who say, you know what, I have tenure, I'm good, I don't have to teach, I don't have to be at my peak performance every time I come to the classroom. How would we address those teachers? You know, there's a couple of different models out there. There's a model that's more punitive in nature, where you hold those teachers to task, and you, as one person I debated, who shall remain nameless, said, we'll,
There wasn't anybody here, was it?
Oh, no, it was not. I'll bring the stick to them, right? Instead of so many carrots, we'll bring a stick, right? But then the other approach is, like Valencia College, just provide more support for teachers who are not doing as well as they otherwise should be. What would you recommend within that context in terms of struggling teachers who might need support?
Well, I think that teachers mostly struggle in their first years, not later on. I mean, I haven't seen that at my school. I haven't seen that type of struggling. I think one of the things we haven't touched upon is what is happening with the Bill Gates Foundation, the money that's coming into the system at the K through 12 level, where tenure really is threatened. It isn't really being threatened at the university and two-year college level yet that I've seen. Going back to Michelle Rhee, her proposal of $130,000 was based on student testing results, so that these faculty would give up their tenure, so that then they would be rated based on how well their students did on exams.
Why is that problematic?
It's a huge problem. First of all, Atlanta, half of the public schools K through 12 in Atlanta, or the ones that were being tested, half of them have been found to be cheating this year. And the superintendent was given Superintendent of the Year award. That superintendent has now resigned. She was complicit in organizing administrators and faculty in the Atlanta public school system to erase the answers on standardized tests and replace them with the correct answers. We've seen this also. They're investigating schools in DC, Baltimore, Houston, Philadelphia, and Miami.
Wow.
So this is going to come to all schools if you're going to put those types of pressures on teachers to say, if your students aren't performing at a certain level, we're going to fire you. Now, and I think that that's a big problem.
Hasn't that been an issue at charter schools? Or am I misspeaking?
Well, all across the board, I think, is what she's saying. Yeah, it has been, yeah.
Another issue with tenure is one thing that you want to have in schools is you want to have continuity. You want to have faculty there for years who understand how the system works and build a real academic environment. If you have high turnover, which is what you have where you don't have tenure, you'll have higher turnover. Among charter schools, the turnover is 25%. Among schools like at the K through 12 level, among schools with tenure at the K through 12 level, it's 14%. So it does make a difference.
Okay. Well, you know, what's interesting for me, I mean, just looking at it from a historical perspective, and you mentioned earlier, Ted, that this whole notion of the granting of tenure was born out of the bigger sort of a labor movement of the late 1800s, and you know, it culminated in the first granting of tenure in 1910. Of course, now, today, we have a similar movement afoot, right? This, well, at the current moment, there's a little something called Occupy Wall Street happening. And I think that's simply an offshoot of a larger concern about the future state of stable jobs, stable employment opportunities. Could you locate this discussion within the context of that movement? Why is it germane to that?
That Occupy movement just affects every issue. You know, you can't talk about any issue without talking about Occupy Wall Street.
Sure.
But it is important. I would suggest that the Occupy Wall Street movement is really a movement focused on sort of the corporate aspect of America and capitalism and the inequality that exists in that model. Now, of course, that has made its way into the public realm. Because they don't work in a vacuum, and so they interact with politicians, they pay politicians, that sort of thing. I would say, however, that the model that we're dealing with in terms of the public sector may be a little bit different from some of these issues, only because the public sector, for instance, the federal government is still the largest employer in the United States. And so when you look at the questions of corporate America, I think that I'm very grateful that the public sector is so strong. Now, the Occupy Wall Street movement, would, I hope, and I haven't heard this, but I would hope that it would look at, say, something like kind of work that we do in the public sector and try to push even for, say, higher wages. I tell my students all the time this story. I went to school with another person that shall remain nameless, a friend of mine who actually is an NFL quarterback right now, and has been an NFL quarterback for the past 10, 15 years. And goodness gracious, probably made more money his first year than I've seen in my last 10 years of working. And I always joke with my students about, man, maybe I should have kept playing football and not tried to go get an education because I would make a lot more money. Yeah. But what I think the Occupy movement speaks to at its core is this inequality that exists. I hope that they tackle this issue as well and get involved, because there is something wrong with this, with a system in which someone would make so much money for playing a sport and not make very much money being an educator.
And everyone gets a teacher. Everyone has a teacher. Linda touched on the points, the K through the 12. Everyone starts kindergarten through high school. And teachers are grossly underpaid.
Yeah, so I think there's a larger concern that teachers are underpaid, they're undervalued in general. How do we reshape that perception? And what's a first step in terms of reshaping this perception about teachers and the fact that teachers, and of course I'm a bit biased here, I think we all are to a certain extent,
of course,
but there has to be increased value perceived in what a teacher brings to a community, to a student, in terms of engagement, in terms of full investment. How do we begin to reshape some of the thinking, the popular thinking about teaching, but within the context of tenure, about creating more stability for teachers so that we can get the most out of them?
I would say, unless someone else wants to tackle this, I would say that we have to stop demonizing teachers. With what Linda mentioned, this concept, this focus on testing, and this focus on if the students are not passing tests, it's the teacher's fault, I think really misses the boat in education. Education is holistic. It is community. It is family. There are qualitative skills that we must look at trying to gauge in some way that are not sort of hard skills. Critical thinking is something, for instance, that is vital to education, but may not be able to be tested in a very clear way. And what we do is, because of this culture of testing now, we blame teachers when things don't happen. I think we've got to change that. We've got to start putting this responsibility for education on the entire community, including the family, because the research still shows that when all things are equal, that the family still is the most significant factor in whether a child is successfully educated or not. And we don't talk about that because we want simple solutions. We've got to open this conversation up.
It seems like the educators are scapegoats, convenient scapegoats, and we tend to have a preference for easier solutions as opposed to the more complicated, holistic ones. Within that context, though, we're all tenure professors, and I know for me, one of the things that I enjoy the most is, well, after I got the guaranteed stability, or maybe not the guaranteed stability, or increased stability of having tenure, is I felt more comfortable in the classroom sphere. And you guys talked about the fact that you can invest yourself more in the educational institution that you belong to. And for me, that meant that I had more opportunities to do things like this, or I had opportunities to work on town hall meetings, or take students to various locales around the city to make certain that they had a breadth of experience to complement what they learned in the classroom. Could you share an experience that was important for you within that context, post-tenure?
I developed a partnership with a multicultural center in Oak Park, Illinois. And so now I feel a little more at ease in requiring my students to do a field trip to the Multicultural Center for their group speech, which is a world global speech.
Nice.
And at this Multicultural Center, they have over 7,000 artifacts from around the world that the students can check out for free with just their college ID card. Clothing, flags, banners, DVDs, just everything that they can use for their country. And initially, I felt a sense of pushback pre-tenure with requiring the students to do that, and wondering about the backlash of, well, how dare she require us to, I signed up for this time, and now I have to do something outside of class.
Sure.
And I'm wanting them to be a more well-rounded student, of course, and again, it's their benefit.
Yep.
And by having that tenure, now I can say, okay, now you can be a well-rounded person. This is a requirement. Because it's a group speech, you can go as a group. And that's just maybe one of several projects that
and I think in our work,
with.
because we both teach the same discipline, I mean, this is teaching politics by its very nature is controversial.
Of course.
Because the conclusion to a lot of what we talk about it in some ways ends up being some level of social revolution. When students wake up and they realize sort of what's going on, they want to get involved and get engaged. And I'm a firm believer, we've gone to Springfield and we've gone to City Hall and we've met with legislators. We've taken student ideas that we develop in class on legislative proposals and pitch those to actual legislators as a way to really get engaged. So I would just say that, in our realm, it's invaluable. I mean, it just is.
Absolutely. And one thing I think that's really critical about tenure is that we have the right to assign the grades the students earn. And we don't have to feel that our job is in jeopardy because of that. Okay. In the same way that a judge can make a decision in a court case and still have his job, that's what we can do.
Parting shots, if you had to leave an impression on the viewing audience about why tenure is important and should be kept in place as is, what is the last thing you learned? 10 seconds apiece.
10 seconds. I found a scripture, Judges 18:7. Then the faculty departed and came to the educational facility and saw the faculty who were there, how they dwelt securely after the manner of tenured faculty, quiet and feeling safe, and there were no hostile students or arbitrary administrations who might put them to shame in anything or injure them, and they were far from unpopular opinions and had no negative dealings with anyone.
That's a hard act to follow, Ted.
I have nothing to say.
I think
the show now.
I think that might be an appropriate ending. Thank you so much, Pamela. Thank you, panelists. I really appreciate you.
Awesome.
For members of this panel, academic tenure is a personal issue since it figures directly into our professional lives. But the agreements made between employers and educators are also a larger issue that affects all Americans, as students and as taxpayers. School board meetings and elections are opportunities for you to make your voice heard on this very important issue, however you may feel. I hope this conversation inspires you to learn more. For the professors, I'm Rashid Carter. Thanks for watching.